Chapter 4. I surely will. Ndidi and Egie were the last to leave the send-off party organized in their honor by a group of friends in London. As they drove through the chilly morning air to their flat in Tottenham in North London, Ndidi touched her husband's arm. "Yes, darling," he asked lazily. "Nothing." They looked at each other and laughed. He put his left arm round her, drew her close and tried to kiss her. "Hey, look out. The lights are red. Stop." "Sorry, love," he said as he quickly applied his brakes. "The last thing we want is to be booked by the police on the eve of our departure from Britain." He drew her into his arms and kissed her passionately. The lights turned green, and a car hooted behind them. Nice," he said, releasing her and driving off. "Lovely. I must look a wreck," she giggled, peering at the mirror. "You'll always look lovely to me," he said affectionately, casting a sidelong glance at her. "Anywhere, anytime, even when you're old and grey," he added. "Same thing here," said Ndidi, smiling, her heart full of love for him. Her mind went back to the day they first met at a dance at the Africa Centre. It was summer and a popular Nigerian band on tour in Britain had been hired for the occasion by one of the numerous Nigerian societies based in London, who had organized the dance. The dance hall had been packed full with nostalgic African and Caribbean citizens who were anxious for a taste of home music and atmosphere. Many of them were students. Egie and Ndidi had both been dancing with their respective partners when their eyes met, and that was it. It had been love at first sight for both of them. They did not speak but kept darting glances at each other, to the irritation of their partners. She had gone home that night deeply disappointed that he had made no move to get acquainted with her. But some days later he had turned up at the flat she shared with a friend, and the relationship had taken off at a high tempo. Even after the wedding he still refused to tell her how he had got her name and address. When they met, he was 26 and a part-time engineering student at a technical college in South London. His father, who had sent him abroad for further studies, had died during his first year, and Egie had had to take up a clerical job with the post office to support himself. He shared a flat with 3 other Nigerian students in Brixton. He took his studies seriously and worked hard and well. Ndidi was 22 and was studying accountancy at a school in Oxford Street. Her father, Chief Amerigo, a prominent lawyer in Bengal State and a member of the National House of Assembly, was sponsoring her. She shared a flat with Denise, a Filipino girl who was studying business administration at the same school. When she realized how hard up financially Egie was, Ndidi offered to help him with money, but he had refused bluntly. He would not even let her pay her own half of the meals they had out, saying that it was carrying civilization and women's lip too far when a man took a lady out and then allowed her to pay for herself. What was the point in taking her out in the first place? At first, she thought his attitude ridiculous. She would want to go to the pictures or the theater or to a dance but couldn't because he could not afford it and was too proud to let her pay for both of them. Once, when he had noticed how disappointed she was, he had suggested that she went alone or with friends to the particular play she wanted to see. This had brought on their very first quarrel, as she had burst into tears saying he did not love her enough or he would not have suggested such an outrageous thing. Seeing the play with the man she loved was quite different from seeing it with friends or alone. She loved him and wanted them to spend all their free time together. He had been surprised at her outburst but had gently insisted that he couldn't afford to pay and wasn't going to let her pay for the two of them. Later, she came to accept the situation. He proposed to her on the first anniversary of their meeting, and she accepted. They both had one more year to go in their studies and they decided they would get married as soon as they graduated. "Shouldn't your parents have met him first before you accepted him?" asked Denise when she was told the good news and shown the engagement ring. "Oh, it doesn't matter," said Ndidi happily. "This is the 20th century, you know. He'll meet my parents in due course. They'll like him and accept him once they know how much in love we are. After all they want is my happiness. I know I'll find it in Egie. That's true. He's a nice boy. If I were getting married to a boy from my country, he'd have to meet my people first before proposing to me. Marrying a foreigner is different, of course. You see, in my country, sometimes marriages are arranged between families. In mine, too. But these days, that practice is diminishing and goes on mostly in the rural areas. Many young people in my country refuse to be forced into arranged marriages. Maybe that's why there are more happy marriages nowadays. Do you think so? I thought arranged marriages lasted longer. Longer perhaps, but they are not necessarily happier. A relationship like marriage should be a fairly happy one even if it lasts for just 1 year. Afterwards you'd have the satisfaction that it had been nice. But to be together for a long time and be miserable with each other, it seems to me, is sheer folly. They had been going out for almost 2 years when Ndidi's parents came to London on holiday and were introduced to Seju. Later, when he asked Chief Amerigo for permission to marry his daughter, Seju was refused. The chief did not conceal his dislike for the young man. "What have you against him, Popsy?" asked Ndidi, angry at the way her man had been dismissed. "I don't like him. But I love him very much." "You do you?" "Well, I don't blame you for that. I would fall in love with him myself if I were a woman. He's handsome, has nice manners and a bright future." "Well, there you are, Popsy," said Ndidi, cooling down somewhat. "He's a very likable young man, I must say," put in Mrs. Amerigo. "But I wouldn't marry him," continued the chief as if the woman had not spoken. "Why ever not?" asked Ndidi, surprised. "For one, you know absolutely nothing about him, his background, his family." "Oh, that doesn't matter in the least. I'm not marrying his family, I'm marrying him. It's what he and I feel about each other that matters." "Don't be childish, Ndidi. When you marry a man, in the African context, you are also marrying his family. You are marrying into a family of which you will become a member. Now, in fairness to yourself, before joining a club you have to find out more about it. If the ideas suit you and so on. You know very well what we in our family expect of our wives, but you don't know what pertains to Seju's family. Then, his background, there may be madness or leprosy in his family. It wouldn't matter to me. I love him and he loves me," said Ndidi stubbornly. "He probably wants to marry you because he knows that your father is rich and an important member of society." "Well, not rich," he amended hastily, not wanting his daughter to ask for a rise in her allowance later. Certainly not rich, but important. Yes, he would like to be the son-in-law of a member of the House of Assembly. I could sense it in his behavior. I doubt it, Popsy. He knew almost nothing about my family when he proposed to me. Besides, you're not flattering me at all. Isn't there anything in me that makes him like me for myself? Something not connected with money and position. Something that made him fall in love with me the very first day he saw me. Well, listen to me, my daughter. To me you're a very pretty and intelligent woman. Any man can easily see that. We, your parents, are very proud of you in all respects. Now, marriage is a serious step in anyone's life, so you don't walk into it blindly. If you're sure both of you want to get married, wait until you get back to Nigeria and you've met his people. He's met us, and besides it's easier for the man. He doesn't have to fit into our family. I don't believe in these made-abroad marriages. Most of them disintegrate when faced with the realities at home. What have you to say about all this, Martha? He asked his wife. You're right, Papa Ndidi, she said. I like the young man. Although he's not of our tribe, I think he's nice. All the same, we know nothing of his family. I think his people should be thoroughly investigated. In fact, they should come to you and ask for our daughter's hand. It is to them that we give or refuse to give our daughter, not to him. Well, if that's the case, said Ndidi, I'll tell Seju to write home to his people. They'll come and see you, Popsy. Please don't be difficult. I love him very much. I'm 24 now and I should know what I want. All right, if that's what you want, said her father sadly. Something still tells me that he's not the right man for you. He has a shifty look about him. Popsy, there's nothing shifty about Seju, laughed Ndidi, relieved that she had won the day. It's because you're a lawyer that you regard most people with suspicion. Why, most of my friends are green with envy. He stops. They got married in a Londoji registry office. Ndidi's mother and her 4 brothers, who were studying in various parts of Europe at the time, attended the wedding, but her father did not. "It is my small way of showing disapproval of the whole thing," he wrote to her later. After their graduation and wedding, the couple stayed in Britain for about 18 months, working and saving money to buy the things they would set up home with when they got back to Nigeria. Ndidi discovered quite early that being a wife was quite a different kettle of fish from being a girlfriend. Being the former involved a lot of responsibility. You had to look after the man and the home. Although she had not strictly been born with a silver spoon in her mouth, she had been brought up where the bulk of the housework was done by maids, and as a student she had done very little housekeeping. So, the first few months were tough for her as she struggled with these duties. Yet, on the whole, it was a blissful period for them because they were very fond of each other. Seju was a considerate man who took his duties as a husband seriously. They were so close to each other that they decided not to start a family right away, as they considered a third party would be an intruder at that stage. When they got back to Nigeria, they settled in Lagos. He got a job with a construction company and she with a bank. They found a small flat in Yoba and life continued very much as before, for they had no serious problems. Ndidi had been a bit apprehensive about her husband's relations, but most of them, including his mother, were residing in Bendel State, and even when they visited, which was rarely, they did not interfere. The only problem she had, which she considered slight at the outset, was Seju's friends. They were of a different breed from the ones she had been used to abroad. There, most of the couples they knew did things together. At weekends and on public holidays, you took your family out and you all had a nice time. It did not matter if you had no money to go out to posh places. Even a stroll in the park armed with fish and chips was something, as what was important was the warmth of being together. Back home things were different, she noticed. Many men did not feel obliged to take out their families. They did their own thing and left the wives and kids to amuse themselves as best as they could. The wives, too, not wanting to be tied down to howling and bored children after a hard week, went out on their own. Most of Seju's friends were in the category of those who left their families at home. She never met the wives of many of them even though these men were forever popping in for visits and dragging Seju out with them. It was when invitations to parties addressed only to Seju began to arrive that she sat up and began to take notice of things. She thought it was rude of the senders when they knew he was married. He thought nothing of it, explaining lightly that most of those parties were men-only affairs and women would be bored stiff there. Ndidi knew that it was taboo to take wives to parties like those for a bachelor's eve or toasting in a new baby, and so she did not worry too much when he sometimes went out alone, although it meant spending some Saturday nights by herself in the flat. However, she was shocked one day when she asked as usual what they were going to do at the weekend, and he told her casually that he was going to spend it in Lome. She was excited. She had never been to a francophone country before. Dear Seju. He had meant it as a surprise. Oh, that's lovely, darling, she gushed. Do we need visas? Are we going by road? I'm going by road with some of my friends. What do you mean, Seju? I mean I'm spending this weekend in Lome with my friends. What about me? She asked, astonished that he had not bothered to tell her of his plans. You do what my friends' wives are doing, that is, stay behind, he said carelessly. Why? Why not? Must you follow me everywhere like Mary's lamb? Already my friends refer to you as my shadow. Seju, are you coming to the party alone or will your shadow accompany you as usual? It's embarrassing. What's embarrassing? We've always planned our outings together. It's normal. Why should what your friends think affect our relationship? Don't you know your own mind anymore? She said, flaring up. I don't actually mind you going off with your friends, but you should have had the courtesy of letting me know of your plans. I'm supposed to be your wife, you know. Look here, he said, flaring up too, I think I've indulged you too much by consulting you about anything I want to do and in taking you out frequently. How many husbands do that? This is not Europe, you know. You can't dictate to me. You're always trying to wear the trousers in this house. I'm master here and I'll do precisely what I like. I see. Well, don't expect me to accept the situation. What will you do? Is it because your father is a lawyer that you are so pompous? My mother did warn me about that. You think of nothing else but of being taken out. It is because you're not gainfully employed. Now, if we had children like other couples, you'd be too busy to. So, that's it. Now, whose idea was it that we should not start a family yet? Mine, I agree, but that was 2 years ago. Quite. You said we should spend the first 5 years on our own, because you wanted our children to come when we could comfortably afford them. I agreed with you. We even decided we'd have just 2 when the time came. You did not tell me you had changed your mind since then. That's true, but it's unnatural for a woman to accept having to wait that long. My mother said perhaps you can't have. For crying out loud. Now, what's happening, Seju? Are you trying to ruin this marriage? If you want us to start a family, why can't you discuss it with me? Why with your mother? The argument went on and on until Seju slammed the door and went out. He did have his weekend in Lome too, although he came back miserable and apologetic. Ndidi forgave him and for a while things were fine, but her confidence in their love had been shaken and she said they would start a family only when Seju was quite sure that that was what he wanted, for she did not believe that the arrival of babies would automatically improve a deteriorating marriage. The couple had to sort out their problems first. She felt it was important that children should be brought into a loving atmosphere. They began to drift apart gradually without realizing it, except that they became aware that they no longer knew each other's plans. Seju was going out alone more, and making frequent weekend trips to Supil. After a few arguments about it, Ndidi left things alone and began to develop other interests to keep herself busy. She took up tennis and swimming and took lessons in flower arrangement. When she complained about Seju's behavior to her mother during one of the latter's trips to Lagos, she was told not to be so fussy over trivial matters. Seju is a good man, said her mother. He's a responsible husband. He pays the rent, he gives you money for housekeeping and he buys you presents. You told me so yourself. Yes, Mama, but that's not all there is to a marriage. I hardly know him anymore. He's changed drastically. We used to be so close. Now, he hardly discusses his plans with me and he's always out. I'm only like a housekeeper here now. Is another woman involved? Doesn't take all his meals at home. He takes most of his meals here. I don't know if there's another woman for, I've never bothered to find out, and I don't encourage gossip about such matters. Well, if he does have another wife, it doesn't matter so long as he continues to take good care of you. By the way, are you still going to wait for 10 years before having a baby? Not 10 years, Mama. The atmosphere in the home has to improve before bringing children into it. Atmosphere. What atmosphere? Aren't you happy? You're lucky to have such a good husband. Why, Rose Okafor, your childhood friend, was thoroughly beaten and sent out of the house by her husband last month, but she's back now. Her people went to beg him to take her back and, after a severe warning, he did. It was no use. Her mother wouldn't understand. Paying the rent and supplying money for housekeeping was more important to her than love and companionship. She didn't blame her mother though, for that was the point of view held by most women of her generation. Financial security was all that mattered. Ndidi wanted more than that from marriage, for after all, she could afford to look after herself comfortably if the need arose. What she wanted was to be one with the man she loved. Otherwise, what was marriage all about? Although she believed in women's lib, she also believed that the man should be the boss in the home, but in partnership with the woman. She admired men who knew their own mind and took firm decisions. Her Seju was easily swayed by what friends and relations thought. It actually upset him not to toe other people's lines, and he tried to make up for this defect by being extremely forceful about things at home. Ndidi began to despise him. She could see a future in which the major decisions in the family were influenced by other people. There would be constant friction, for they both had a stubborn streak in their character. Seju had not stopped loving his wife. He had no doubt in his mind about that. How he wished things could continue the way they had been abroad. Both of them had been very close and what they did was their own business. Here things were different. If you were constantly seen in the company of your wife, then you were tied to her wrapper, you were not a man in your own home. He hated criticism and particularly criticism from his mother, who pretended to accept Ndidi but who actually disliked her intensely because her son loved the girl and was happy with her. She had had an unhappy polygamous marriage in which she had been the neglected wife, even though she was the one who produced the heir. This had made her very bitter. Seju was all she had, and she was jealous of Ndidi's self-confidence and happiness. Moreover, she was afraid that her son might be swallowed up by her daughter-in-law's more prominent family, so she did her best to destroy the union. She wanted a daughter-in-law she could have under her thumb. She found such in Bemi, a neighbor's daughter whom Seju had known all his life. This girl was 23, pretty in a dark slim way, and was a teacher in one of the local schools in Sapio. She was shy and unassuming. Whenever Seju came down from Lagos, he would find Bemi in the house helping his mother with the chores. Later on, she began to prepare his meals and wash his clothes. At first, he took her out as a neighborly gesture, then gradually a relationship developed. He was not in love with her, but she was a contrast to his lively wife, so her shyness and modesty sometimes came as a relief to him. On the rare occasions that Ndidi had accompanied him to Sapio, Bemi did not call, so she never knew of the other's existence. When a friend told her that a girl in Sapio was expecting a baby by her husband, it did not come as a surprise to Ndidi. It explained all those trips there. She was shattered, of course, but she found that it was not as awful as she had always imagined such a situation would be. Could it be the result of the gap that existed in their relationship? When asked, Seju readily admitted the affair, and even with obvious relief, for he had been at a loss as to how to broach the topic to her. She looked at her husband. He was like a stranger. She could not even remember having seen the shirt he had on before, and she used to buy all his shirts and ties. Where had their love gone? When had they stopped loving each other? What had gone wrong? Whose fault was it? Would things have been different if they had remained abroad, far away from interfering friends and relations? These questions were going through her mind when she suddenly realized that Seju had left the room. Later, she heard him drive off. There had been no remorse, no apology, no explanation. She sat down in the dark room and cried a bit over their lost love. What was she to do? Should she stay put and hope that the affair would die out? But how? A child was involved, so the relationship could never really be wiped out. Anyway, could she really remain in such a loveless atmosphere? Seju solved the problem a month later when he sought and obtained a transfer to Minna. He did not invite Ndidi along with him. He simply packed his things and left. His mother promptly went to live with him, taking Bemi with her. Ndidi stayed on in Lagos for some months afterwards while she reorganized herself. Then she resigned from her job and moved to Benin City. Her parents were sympathetic, but there was little they could do for her. She became restless, and in the course of 1 year she changed jobs twice. She kept blaming herself for the failure of her marriage. She ought to have made more effort to save it. She should have come off the pill and started a family. Had she actually been too proud? Perhaps she. What hurt her most was that Seju had made no move to communicate with her in any way since he moved out. How could he have cut her out of his life like that? It was callous. It was as if they had never met. The next 3 months were traumatic. She became very ill and had to go into hospital. When she got better, her mother took her to youth to recuperate, and after about a month there she was well enough to return to Benin City. She moved into a flat of her own and began to look for a job. But it took her nearly 4 months to find something suitable. She had come to terms with herself and had stopped frequent thoughts about Seju and their broken marriage. No one brought her news of him, and she did not inquire about him. Many months afterward she got a letter from a solicitor informing her that Seju had filed a suit for a divorce. She handed it to one of the lawyers in her father's chambers for a follow-up and tried to settle down to a new life. She loved her new job, which involved a lot of responsibility and was more challenging than anything she had had so far. She threw herself into it and shut out most other things. The only time she relaxed was during her monthly trips to the company's other branches outside Benin City. After a business trip, she always took 1 day off. This she spent as she liked, either sightseeing or just lazing around. She was thankful she had no children yet, for it would have meant frequently leaving them in the care of someone else, and this she would have hated to do. As it was, she had only herself to look after, and so it did not matter if she spent most of her time on the job. It was during one of these trips that she had met Gogo. They had adjoining seats on the plane from Lagos to Port Harcourt. He was a tall thin man, but handsome in a delicate way. A woman's first instinct on seeing him was to take him away somewhere, feed him and look after him forever. He drew out one's maternal feelings, but he was actually very strong and forceful in character. He had a way of making people take notice of him even if they did not want to. Ndidi did not usually like being chatted up in a plane by men because she believed they used the intimate atmosphere to pick up ladies, and this made her feel cheap. But on this occasion, seeing Gogo sitting there gazing sadly into space, her curiosity was aroused. He looked so vulnerable. Could he be dumb and deaf? She did not know that this was one of the ploys he used to attract the ladies, for he was a playboy. If the soulful look did not work, then he would switch on his chatty self. A lady had to be very strong not to fall for one or the other. At first, she ignored him, but when he refused his tea, his breakfast, and a drink, she had to ask him if he was sick. He shook his head sadly. She ignored him again. His silence irritated her. "What is the matter then?" she asked, in spite of herself. He quickly came alive and brought out a pocket pad. "I would like to know you, but I'm a very shy man," he wrote. They both burst out laughing. Within 10 minutes he had extracted from Ndidi her name and address, and where she was staying in Port Harcourt. He told her he was an architect based in Warri and that he was roaming about looking for contracts. He was so funny that Ndidi thought. He was the first man to interest her since Seju. That evening he turned up in her hotel dressed in the traditional attire of the Delta area, a wrapper, a loose silk shirt, coral beads, a hat with a feather tucked in it, sandals, and a walking stick. He looked elegant and a bit older than his 35 years. He led her to a sleek sports car, and then they were off to explore the town. There wasn't really much to see, but he was so full of enthusiasm as he took her from place to place that she didn't want to spoil it all by telling him that she would rather sit down for a drink and a chat. As she crawled into her bed in the early hours of the morning, she wondered if she hadn't bitten off more than she could chew by taking on someone like Gogo. He was so restless, yet he was such a charmer that it had been nice to be swept along in his zest for life. When they returned to Bendo State, he began courting her in earnest. He often came down to Benin City on business or to spend the weekend. She found that despite his funny ways, he was dedicated to his work. He told her that he had 7 children from 2 broken marriages, lots of girlfriends, but that she was special to him. She did not know whether to take him seriously or not, but she grew quite fond of him, and the relationship continued. Although she had always been a one-man girl, this time she occasionally dated other men, because she was scared of getting deeply involved with Gogo, who was becoming more and more possessive. He would sulk to no end whenever he was in town, and she was out with another guy. This amused her. She couldn't understand why such a thing bothered him, for after all they weren't married, and he had his other girls. He began to get serious. He wanted them to go steady and get engaged. She was fond of him, but marriage was very far from her mind, certainly not when the scars from the final days of her time with Seju were still very fresh. In fact, she had half made up her mind to forget about marriage and to have relaxed and enjoyable relationships only. Anyway, could she cope with a man with 7 children who was a notorious playboy to boot?